All right, so good evening. Welcome to session 4 of the Intro to Coding Live. So it is Monday, August 22nd. We just had Greg Drobny, the student outreach and recruitment manager, talk to us here for about 20 minutes or so. And we're going to dive into the actual coursework for the class tonight. And I'm sorry, actually, before I dive into this, I did want to talk to you about the end of class on Thursday, where I was working on the challenge for the removing zeros. And so let's see here. Let me pull this up. Okay. So I cleaned up my notes, and also I was able to solve the last bit of the challenge. And I'll show you what was throwing me off here. So we have our steps to work through this, as well as kind of what our initial solution looked like, and then what I would kind of regard our optimized solution. We had a stretch goal of trying to get this pretty much with just built-ins. And this does work with the dot map. And so it is common when you have multiple built-in functions to split the dot notation on the dots to the next line down to make it a little bit more readable. This one is still admittedly tough to read, and I don't necessarily like this solution. Like, I think if I were to put something into production, I would probably go with this. To me, this is easier to read. However, if you notice, this is a one-line solution, right? So I have taken all of the built-in functions and I have put it directly on the return line. So notice this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 with the return, right? So even though this is 6 less lines of code, to me, the syntax is a little bit more difficult to read. And it gets even worse if I do something like this. Right, so this would not be something that, like, if one of my developers pushed this code up looking like this, I would say something to them saying that they need to clean this up to make it a little bit more readable. And typically the way that we would do that is to split it on the dot. We could do it off the first one or any of the other ones. The first one helps kind of bring it back to the side a little bit, but because of this ternary operator, this is kind of a messy line. Like if I pull it over this way, it reads a little bit better. And I don't know how many characters across this is going, but typically most projects will have preset limits where you can only go 80 characters across, or you can only go 100 or 120 characters across. And that if you were to cross that boundary, like your code would be rejected, or they'd tell you to do something like this to help try and split it up. Now, when we split on Thursday, I was having issues with my, I was printing out my array. And when I was doing that, I was getting an array full of undefined. So let's go ahead and take a look at this again here real quick. I'm just going to give and actually I'll put it in the notes for today, and we'll split it up a little bit. So, but this is like a final all built-in answer using .map. But again, I would probably say that this is the way that I would go with the final answer for this one, even though this does work as well. So let's take a look here and build out just a sample array. So let's say, well, in fact, array of numbers will work here. So let's go ahead and comment this out for right now. And now I can say let new array equal array of numbers dot map, and I can say num times 2, and I can say console.log array of numbers, or I'm sorry, new array. Oops. Index unexpected token, because I didn't comment that out. All right, so there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So it looks like my dot map worked here. Now on Friday, I was getting a little bit more complicated. So when you have what's called a callback function, which is the dot map uses them for each, where basically you're doing a inline anonymous fat arrow function, right? So this means that I'm running a function. This is the logic of my function. Typically, they're meant to be a little bit more simple, but if I need this to go to 2 lines, and just by hitting that, when you bring it out to 2 lines, you have to wrap it in the curly braces. And what happens is when you have it on 1 line, there is a implicit return there. Once you wrap it in the curly braces, you lose your implicit return, right? So I got, and if you remember this from Friday, I got a full array with a bunch of undefined in it. And that is because I am not returning anything here. All right, so now it's working. So if you have a callback function on 1 line, you don't need the curly braces, but let's say if I were to do something more complicated, so I could say if num remainder 2 triple equals 0. So can you, well, sorry, 1 second. Sounded like a cat disaster. You got it? Okay. Sorry about that. Cat took a poster frame off the top of a bookshelf. So, and I apologize. That'll be great in the recording for future generations of coding students. What am I trying to accomplish with this bit of logic right here?
Find the even numbers.
Yep, because any even number divided by 2 should be evenly divisible by 2, right? So, and that's what this is saying, that if I take the number and use the remainder operator on it by 2, if the answer is 0, this is telling me that it's an even number, right? And so now I can do something like this, where I return num times 2, else we can do return num times 3. And now notice that I have 2 returns in my statement, but I'll only ever hit one of them each time through, right? So if I took the else out of here and put this in my if statement, both of these in my if statement, I get unreachable code here. So you can only ever have one return statement in a function. So this will have multiples, but only one of them is ever reachable at a time. And so now if I run this, what I would expect is that I would get 1 times 3, 2 times 2, 3 times 3, 4 times 2, 5 times 3, 6 times 2. Right, so 3, 4, 9, 8, 15, 12. So it looks like that worked. Now, the reason I'm doing this and why I have these returns again is because I have the multiple lines here. And notice, like in my remove zeros, when I did this, I used a ternary, right? And so I'm saying if element to check is triple equal to string 0, return an empty string, or if it's not triple equal to string 0, return the actual element to check. And so same thing here. is I think if I bring this, I should be able to bring this up into a ternary, and I can remove my return statements if I put this on one line. So let's go ahead and let's call this new, or let's just call this multi-line array. We'll call it multi-line answer. And we'll do this, and we'll call this single line answer. And I haven't done this ahead of time, so I'm not 100% sure, but if all of my other logic holds true, I'm guessing that if I pull this up into my into a ternary, that it should work without the return statements. All right, and so I can get rid of all of this. And all the way down to here. And then put that there. And if I were to stretch this out, all right, and so now if I do console.log single line answer, all right, so there's my 3, 4, 9, 8, 15, 12. All right, so this is the same thing as this, right? This is just doing it in one line. So if I don't need to do it on multiple lines, right? Or I'm sorry, if I'm doing it on multiple lines, the return no longer becomes implicit. However, if I do my callback just in one line, so the whole thing's not wrapped in brackets, my returns are implicit. And so hopefully, it was definitely an aha moment for me after class when I dug into what was happening. And so hopefully this helps kind of explain what was going on. Any questions about this? No? Okay. Again, just stressing that this right here does the exact same thing as that. All right, so moving on then. So into the classwork for tonight. So what is an object literal? A data type that holds a collection of properties where each property is an association between a name, which we refer to as a key, and a value. All right, so we've talked about objects a couple of times now. So we've got our key one, value one. So this is our key value pair. Right, this is a key value pair, and so on. And we built an object here just a couple of minutes ago. Objects can represent anything. I think I showed that on night 1 or night 2, right? We can have strings in here, we can have other objects, we can have arrays. The nesting, where technically isn't infinite because you'll run a computer out of memory. You can nest very like more than what is reasonable layers deep. So you can have dozens of objects nested inside of other objects. All right, object key values. An object literal keys and values do not have to just be string and data types. They can be other types as well. So again, same thing, string, string. We've got an array of strings, and then we've got an object with a basically, so this whole thing, organization is an object, and then cohorts is a object. And so we've got the key of 2020, and the value for that would be a array of strings, right? So we could say, I don't know which ones were in 2020, but probably like Kilo, Mike in November would be 2020, and then Oscar, Papa, Romeo, and so on. All right, so let's use interacting with an object literal. Let's use a simple object literal example. Let organization, code, platoon, nonprofit. So accessing value by key. So we can use dot and bracket syntax, and I'll show that here in just a second. And what do we got here? Okay, and so, yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look at this here real quick. So we can say, we can do this. So we can say console.log. Just comment this out here real quick. Instructor, and that's going to show me the whole object. Right, so let me console.log that out as well. Any other ones? No, okay, so we should be good. Pull this back open here a little bit. All right, so there's my entire object. Now I can do first name. Right, and I'm accessing a value by the key. I can also do right, and now where and you can do this either way, but there are limitations to dot notation that are not necessarily the same in bracket notation. So same thing, all of these, and JavaScript is great for this. We're doing everything in camel case here. However, if I want something more descriptive as a key, I can use quotes, and I can say, right, and do something like this. Now, I can go back to bracket notation here and do date of birth. Whoops. Right, and there's my date of birth. I cannot do this with a string. Right, and same thing, even if I take it out of here, right, now I'm throwing error messages. It doesn't work. So,
So if we see like the key is in quotation marks or it's a string, that's pretty much like a telltale we need to use bracket notation instead of dot.
yes.
You know.
And you can, and the other thing as well, I'm not 100% sure, so let's try this one as well. Let's do this. Don't know if I can just do .0 here. Yeah, so it does not like that using a number, right? But if I do this, this might not work. Okay, no, so you got it by that. I don't know what happens when I do a string. Okay, I get it either way, right? And same thing, I don't, so let's try date of birth. Right, without having the strings, it doesn't like this. So let's throw some examples up here. right? And so just kind of getting into it stylistically, if you are building an object, right? You're working, you need to write some code, you need to build an object. Typically, I would say that you want to name everything, no spaces. You want to avoid leading numbers, because like as soon as I put a letter in front of it, and you can see like it turns blue instead of green, that means it'll get picked up. So you typically want to handle it this way. You can do it this way, you can do it this way for special purposes, but when you do it this way, it no longer matters if you access it through dot notation or through bracket notation. And the other thing I would say stylistically is whatever one you pick, try and stick with that as much as possible. Right now, we can make this uglier intentionally, right? So I could do this. Right, and so if I wanted to look at that, I would have to do console.log instructor box 0, and then I could say dot greeting, right? And I would hope to see hello here. No, I get undefined. Because I did 0 instead of 1, sorry. All right, so there's hello. Now, same thing, I could do this just for kind of like consistency's sake. And that's what I say is, like, if you can do something in one thing in dot and the next thing in bracket, is try and match your syntax so that it's the kind of like the same all the way through, right? So if we said right, so we're doing the same thing, we're going into nested arrays with both of these. Just know that try and keep it consistent when you do it, and across the whole application where possible, but definitely within the specific lines of code. Any questions about any of the stuff that I just did right here?
Is it possible to return a value inside of the object and keys, or no?
What do you mean by so we only return values out of a function. So
okay.
right now I am accessing the value with either bracket or dot notation, and then I am console.logging, which .log is it's a built-in method on the console class, and because it's one line, I am returning this to the console.
Yeah, that's my fault. I confuse that as like a function when it's not.
Yeah, this is a built-in method. But like when we're doing this, this is accessing the information, accessing the value inside of a data structure, in this case, inside of an object. All right, and any other questions with this stuff? And it's a great question, because again, it's the more you ask this stuff, and please don't keep it bottled up, ask me, get it out there. Even if you have the wrong idea, now you know the right answer. The other people in the class, you guys are you're probably my quietest class so far, and this is my 4th time teaching it, so I know more now than I did the previous 3 times, so I'm here to help. But yeah, don't worry about asking questions, ask them. let's talk about it. You guys are watching me do this in real time. You're watching me screw things up too. No one knows all of the right answers to this. That's why we have Google and why we teach classes like this.
Hey,
All right.
Charles, quick question. I was just wondering about if the keys in an object are immutable, or like, do you ever need to change the keys? And if like you do, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, so, and I'm trying to think if that is coming up here. Okay, yeah, so it doesn't actually look like we specifically talk about that. So yeah, I'm happy to show that. So doing things with a key, sorry, where did we go? All right, so adding a new value is really easy. So we can say instructor, and let's give it a key. Let's just call it middle name equals Robert. Right, and then console.log instructor. I think this works. Right, so, and again, there's no set specific order because it doesn't matter because there's no index position in here or anything like that. But you can see that's all I had to do to do that. Now, mutating a key, I don't know that we can change the name of a key or if we just have to delete the old key and then add a new key, right? So as far as the value, it's definitely reassignable, right? So I can say instructor first name equals Chuck, right? And so I've overwritten the first name. And same thing, if I do this, right? So notice how I'm not really throwing an error or anything like that. Now let me comment this out. Right, but notice how I still only have one first name in here, and it's whatever one I put in last. So I can do it again down here. Right, and so I'm just overwriting these values, and this is not the correct way to overwrite the values. Like this is an error, but keys are unique identifiers, so there can only ever be one first name inside of this, right? So let me delete these. Now let's look up. So can you change the name of a key in an object in JS? Okay, so an inbuilt. How about a built-in function rename? So no, you can't do it. And it's kind of like what I just said we would probably have to do, which is to assign the new key, the old value, and then in a separate operation, delete the key. And so it does have a delete function or like a delete command built in here. So we could do something like this, where I say, we can do this way. So let's go ahead and say went, or we'll say, instructor key attended CP, right, as our new key, and then we can assign that to instructor alumni, right? And so let's console.log again here. And then lastly, we can say, actually, I hope we can say this. So there's delete instructor alumni in console.log instructor. Let's go ahead and comment these two out here real quick. All right, so there's my three objects, right? So there's alumni is true. And there's alumni is true and attended CP is true. And now alumni is gone and we just have attended CP. Okay, so
Awesome. Thank you so much.
and I wouldn't necessarily do like a console.log in between each of them, other than for demonstration purposes, but we would definitely need these two steps to get rid of an old key and replace it with a new one. All right. And so let's see, I believe we're back here. Right, and so we talked about dot notation and bracket notation. And let's use a simple object literal example. When in is used, we cite an object, it can check for containment against the existing keys, or we can use a built-in method, which has own property. So we may have peeked at this earlier, but let's go ahead and take a look at this again. So let me just console.log these out here. And so if we do something like console.log, we need to wrap this in anything. So we just say if name in, so name in organization. Let's see, can we do this in a ternary? Okay, so we don't do that. Just do true, false. Let's see if this works. So false, because name doesn't exist in there. But if I put first name, we get true, right? So we can check for something in here, and I did this as a ternary. We could also do the same thing if first name in instructor this, and so we should get one true and one false. All right, if I delete this S, right, these two things are doing the exact same thing. One is just a little bit less typing, right? And same thing here, we could do so property name determines whether an object has a property with a specified name. All right, so false. True. So these two things also do the exact same thing. So instructor dot has own property, and then the property is the same thing as saying property in and the name of the object. All right, so built-in methods on objects. So object has own property, which we just took a look at. Object.keys, and let's see, returns an array of keys. So if we want to know all of the keys inside of our object, so we could say log, and say And that is definitely spelled wrong. It's not a function. And I think this may have to be a slightly different syntax if I'm remembering. So keys. So let's try this. So if I say object, so I'm calling directly on the object class, I'm going to look at instructor. All right, and there's the list of keys for instructor.
Is there a reason it listed that like kind of like almost reverse order, did like 0, 1 first, then?
No, there's no specific reason outside of the fact that when you do an array is allocated, is basically saved in memory in order. When you do an object, there is no order to it. So when you get it back, my guess is that the replit will keep returning it in the same order to me over and over again. But if I were to go to a different computer and do it in VS Code, I may get it in a different order because there is no indexing, there is no guaranteed position because order does not matter inside an object.
All right, thank you.
Yep. And okay. And so we'll see the same thing here. We've got object.values. Should be the same format here. Right, and so same thing. Notice how they're kind of coming in the same order between the keys and the values. And again, most likely just how they're saved into memory, because the order that they get printed out in, one is not guaranteed, two does not matter. All right, and entries returns an array of key value of the object when iterating through it. So we can do here again, and this should give me the entire key value pair. All right, and so now I've got an array of all of the key value pairs. All right. So that is it for session 4 as far as talking, and we can start to get into the challenges. Does anyone have any questions for me before we start launching into challenges for the evening?
What would be like the best like case scenario for, like when you're working with like databases and you're trying to pull stuff out of them, or for objects?
Sorry, can you say that one more time, please, Chad?
Yeah, like when would be like the best time to use an object class, like when you're trying to like working with like databases or anything like that, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're working with algorithms right now, and we're specifically varying what you need so that you get practice with the different types of building blocks. And as we've seen, like there's a lot of times where I'll demonstrate multiple solutions, and here's a way to solve it with an array, here's a way to solve it with a like an object. When you start dealing with databases, and more importantly, APIs. So a database is just where we store the information. When you retrieve information from a database and you display it on a screen, you're not like going directly into the database typically and pulling the information out. You're using a middle layer, which is an API. And that is basically what goes and fetches all of the information out of the database for you, and then returns it to you in a preset format. And most APIs are going to return information in JSON format. So we can take a look here and let's do. Right, so this is, and so notice, see, here, and I'll make this bigger for everyone. Right, but notice that, what do we got here, right? This is in JavaScript, this is an object. So here's an object, here's a key value pair with a string. What's this? This is an array. Inside this array is multiple objects. So we've got the data series is an array of objects. Right, and this is, all of this stuff is saved in columns in a database. But when I ask the 7timer.info API to retrieve the information for me, it's returning it in a JSON format, which is like JavaScript object notation, which is by far and away the most popular way to consume a database and an API. And then what I would do is write an algorithm that would map through this and then display so instead of just displaying it like this, almost all information that comes back from an API looks like this until we tell a front-end web application, so what we typically refer to as the website portion of it, to make it look pretty and make it look presentable and make it look easy to read, right? So this is the same thing as this, right? Like when we get this information up here, right, and I click in here, all of this information is saved in a database somewhere, right? And it came back the exact same way that this did. And then there's the front end of the weather.com application that is then taking it and plugging it into different front end components and displaying it in a like an easy to read, visually pleasing way of displaying the data. Right, and we can inspect this and we'll see what happens here. I don't know how much I'll be able to see. Clear that out. Let's clear this. This is bad because weather.com's got so many different ads and tracking cookies on it. It's like a total mess here. So let's see if I can see anything by JSON. All right, so like all of this stuff is coming in through JSON, but and this isn't the weather information, but this is all stuff that's coming back from the API, right? Like this is all metadata that's being saved, and this is telling my front end browser where to find this image, because you don't save the image directly in a database, you store it. If you're using Amazon Web Services, you store it in an S3 bucket, which is image storage or universal anything storage, and you save the URL to the bucket that you're saving at, and then you plug it in here, right? So this is an image, like the little sun icons or images, and all of those have URLs, and all of that gets returned, and then we find it, and then we figure out how to display it. But this is the preview. Let's see here. But if I come to payload response, so this is the raw response, right? So all of this, and notice how long this bar is, right? And it's just, I mean, it's computer readable, but it's hard to read as a human. But all of these are objects, right? And they're saved in JSON format. And the browser is nice enough to say, okay, here's an object. These are all the different items in my object, which are nested objects. And pretty much all of these are nested objects. And I can look at different ones in here. So this is probably some sort of like tracking cookie stuff. I'm seeing like different, maybe like display guidelines coming in, right? So here's my ads. right? All of this stuff is saved in objects, saved in, and then transmitted in JSON format. And the software that I work on a daily basis is doing the exact same thing, right? And so here's all the different things. Like here's the like share on Facebook, share. So there's that. And then if we were to come back here and take a look at the actual website, I'm pretty sure I could probably find the little buttons that say like, right? So here's the little share buttons, right? And so all of this stuff is getting pushed from somewhere else and it's being transmitted to my web browser in a JSON format. All right, so that was a deep dive into that, but this is kind of like the first look behind the curtain there at what goes on a website. All right, so that's all of that. And then Chad, did that, and I'm sorry, I know I talked quite a bit there and kind of went deep, but did that answer your basic question as well?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right, so it is 7:30. Let's go ahead and take a 7:31. So let's go ahead and take a 9-minute break and we'll get back together here at 7:40 and we're going to launch into the challenges. We'll decide if you guys want to dive into one first or if you want me to tackle one first and then we'll go from there. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording and I'll see everyone at 7:40 Central Time. All right, so recording's back on. Welcome back from the caffeine control flow challenge. There's a number of different ways to solve this using different data structures or within the challenge itself. It does say control flow, so using like some different methods here, like using like an if statement or if else statement, or even using a switch statement. Did anyone solve it using a switch statement? No. Okay, so I'll go ahead and show a switch statement. I know there's lots of different ways to do it, and this isn't necessarily the quickest way to do it, but it is one of the ways to do it, and so we'll just demonstrate it doing a different way. All right, so first off, a switch statement. Oh, I think I got someone not on mute over here. Go. All right. Oh, don't worry. We have an MDM one. All right. So a switch statement is kind of like it's a if else statement. However, you can use this for lots of different choices here, as well as there's some interesting things that we can do, including fall through here. So let's go ahead and solve this with the switch statement. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to say switch, and we're going to say day. And we're going to get it. Oh, actually, I think it's this way. There we go. All right. And so we've got this. So there's our expression for us. We're in a function. So we're going to use day. And we're going to start doing our cases, which is just case. Basically what we want to match against, a colon, and then we're going to put our information in. All right. So this and this. All right, so we can say our first case is Monday. So case M. Right, and we can go through all of these here real quick. T. They just said R for Thursday. Yep, R for Thursday. Okay. And so now we know that we will have on Monday, we've got 800. Tuesday was 600, 400, 400, 900. Okay, so what we need to do is basically return this value or pass this value on if we match that day, right? So I can say this. And actually, let's see here. So within this, they get into, so they're showing the break statements. Okay, so there are some traps within using a case statement, and if anyone noticed, they do have break in here. And the reason being is because if you do not break, or if you do not return out of here, what will happen is if you match multiple cases, you will return each of those cases. You will fall through in your case statement. So let's go ahead and do this, and we'll just do assignment. So we'll say let caffeine. Did I spell that right, or did I spell that right? Spell it right. Okay. And so I'm not going to assign anything yet, and so I'll do this. All right, and now I'm assigning. And we'll just delete this for right now. And let's go ahead and console.log caffeine. All right. So there we can see, and so I get an undefined because remember I'm not returning anything yet. But when I did this, I put in Monday. What did I get?
Yeah, Friday back.
Yep. So when I do this, notice how when I went in here into this case, I hit this. And the same thing, do this. Right, I get that 900 again. And so I can do this. I don't think, throw that in there. I don't need the semicolon. All right. So now I'm back to where I need to be for this. So each one of these lines needs a break statement.
Could you define the break one more time, please?
Yeah, all break is saying is that you can use the break statement within a switch statement body to break out early, often when all statements between two case clauses have been executed. Execution will continue at the first statement following the switch. So what this is doing is saying, if I don't have any break statements in here, what happens is I hit this first case when I put M in. And it does this, and then it does this, and it does this, and then it does this, and then it does this. So when I add a break in here, it is exiting from the switch statement. So without the break statements, I come in, I do day, I hit my first case, and I go here, 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 and then I leave the case statement. When I put a break in, if I have an M, I come in, I hit here, I do this, I hit this. This tells me no more, and I come down to here. Right, and so that is one way to handle it. And when it's always better safe than sorry to use that break statement. All right, so now what I need to do is go ahead and take my caffeine. And so I've got my variable here and I need to return it out. So if I return now, caffeine, all right, I'm still just getting the raw caffeine amount for whatever day that I'm using. 400, that's good. And so now I need to take this, and I know that my can is 150 per can, right? And so when I run this, I get 2.666. Now, when we talked about this over here, we need to round this up. So, and we're always going to round up. So even if this was 2.01, it's more than 2. So that means that I need 3 cans. And so to do that, let's go ahead and take a look in here and say MDN JS, how to round number up. All right, so the math.ceil function always rounds the number up to the next largest integer. So math.ceil and then my number. So now I can come back here and say you right, so I'm at 3. If I do Monday, right, 6 cans, 6 times 100, 600, 6 times 50 is 300, 900. So that's good, because if I only had 5 cans, I'd only have 750. If I do Tuesday, it should be this. Now it should be 4 cans. So let's try that. Now, both Wednesday and Thursday are identical, right? So they both take 400 milligrams of caffeine. What we can do with a case statement is we can actually clean this up a little bit. I'm sorry, I said case statement. I mean a switch statement. It is my fault that I do them back and forth, but it is a switch statement. Call it case statements because you give it a bunch of cases, but it is a switch statement. So let's say switch statement or identical cases.
Is that like a default?
Well, so default is, let's say that and I'll tackle that next. So let me handle the duplicate statements first, and we'll come back to that. But basically, and this isn't what I'm looking for. This is saying the same message. Yeah, so switch statement syntax for same action through different cases, right? So I can do something like this, right? I can actually take this out here, right? And I don't need a break, and I don't need anything in here. And what this is going to say is if I hit Wednesday, just fall through to Thursday. If I hit Thursday, do Thursday. So now if I hit Tuesday, I still get 4. If I hit Wednesday, I get 3. And if I do Thursday, I get 3. All right, so now my Wednesday case just falls through to Thursday because they're the same answer, right? And there's the same thing, like if Tuesday was the same, I could do the same thing here, right? And clean it up even further, but Tuesday is a different day. Now, I'm sorry, I didn't catch you threw it out there, but someone did bring up a default case. And
Yeah, I was just thinking that you could use the default case to handle those 2 days, but I don't know if you can.
You could, but then we don't have a default case for something else, which we're only talking about 5 days of the week here, right? So what about Saturday and Sunday? So the default case basically catches all other cases here. So there's no, it's kind of like the else in an if else statement. So just make sure I'm plugging this in here, right? Right, so we've got default down here. So see, there's no specific case with it. And I could say, do this, return. Right, so here we punched out. So and the same thing, if I put anything in here other than one of those days of the week that I have a specific case for, right, it's always going to hit the default case. And so that's why normally we would use the default case to catch everything other. I wouldn't necessarily want to use it to catch just duplicate values. I would use the follow through syntax here. All right, and with a lot of things, if you didn't want to deliver a message and you just need to do something, like we would return -1 out of here, right? And so we know that if we return if you see -1 as a response, that there was some sort of problem happening. We didn't get the input that we were looking for. Right. So this is solving that with a case statement, which again, arguably is more typing than say doing it with a like an object and using bracket notation to identify the key value pair with say the day of the week and the amount of caffeine that correlates with that day. But because we were doing control flow and we haven't talked about switch statements yet, I just wanted to basically do that as an example for everyone. All right, so it is 8:40. The next couple, and so I did skip over hot potato. I typically do this one towards the end of class because this one isn't hard to code, but you have to know a specific game logic concept. I don't know why they put it on the list other than it forces you to rack your brain to go figure out how to count turns. Yeah, I can show that here next, Amanda. Can I go to the bar? What's your grade? Cold enough are all very but I recommend that you guys take a stab at them, especially if you're still struggling a little bit with control flow, and I can drop answers for them in there, but they're all basically at this point like if else statements or case statements, or identifying them inside of a like a data structure. It's just more of the same of this. However, Wednesday we will launch into Fizzbuzz. If anyone wants to take a look at that ahead of time, they're more than welcome to. This is a very famous challenge. It is people love making people suffer through these in interviews. And if people haven't heard of it yet, the concept of whiteboarding is basically forcing people to write pseudocode or to solve algorithms without using like an IDE, right? So like you may go into an interview and they may sit down and have you actually solve a problem. Other times they may have you walk through step by step how to solve a problem without using any code. And when things were much more in person, you would do that on a whiteboard standing up in front of the room in front of a couple of interviewers. And so Fizzbuzz is like a very famous entry-level problem for developers. Okay, so kind of a shorter version of this. So if I said Right, I would just create a data structure here that has my day and the corresponding caffeine for each of it. And so we could look at something where we could do let number of drinks equals it would be calf per day divided by 150. And do the same thing. Math.seal. And then return num of drinks. And let me just do this. Oops. Calf per day, because I did not capitalize my P. All right, 4 drinks. Friday, I'm expecting 6 drinks. All right. Now, some steps that I would probably take here is 150 is great, but that limits me to I can only buy that one can that has exactly 150. So probably one of the first things I would look at doing for cleaning this up would be to do something like this, where I say const calf per day equals 150. And then change this to calf per day. And that way, if my can size changes, I can always change it here, right? I could also do something like this where
Hold on 1 second. Having the constant declared as cap per day plus the object, the same variable name, wouldn't that cause an issue or?
sorry, yes, it would. And I meant to, instead of saying calf per day, I meant to call this calf per can. So good catch there, thank you. That probably makes a lot more sense now, right? So so calf per can, and so that's that here, right? And also I don't need to assign this a variable. I could do this in place. Oops, sorry. All right, so this to me would be like a workable short. And the next step away from this we could do is like if we could say, all right, so like calf per can. So because one of the things we do as software developers is we don't want to write a lot of code that we're never going to use, but we want to ask questions and gather requirements that are useful, right? So if someone came to me and said, hey, I need you to do this for me, I'm writing a caffeine tracker, and I would say, do you ever, like the first question I say is like, do you ever buy different size cans? Do you ever drink half a can, right? Like, do you just, you go out and if you need to hit 800 milligrams, you go out and you buy 6 Red Bulls and you shotgun those things throughout the day, right? And wouldn't it be more cost effective if you go out and buy like a Monster XL that has 400 milligrams of caffeine in it, and you only have to buy 2 of those, right? And they say, well, yeah, no, that makes sense. And sometimes I do buy different things. Well, then I'd say, well, why don't I write this so that we can, instead of just hardwiring 150 in there, and it doesn't work if you ever need to buy anything different, let's go ahead and create a different or a second object here. And let's give you a couple of different options for the amount of caffeine that you take in per can. And so we could say something like this, right? Where we say small right? And now, instead of just saying calf per can, we could do it this way, right? And we can say can size. Right, so if I'm on Friday and I've got 900 and I need that, I'm gonna be buying small cans, right? There's my 6. But if I'm gonna go out and buy large cans on Friday to save some money, right? Now I only need 3 large cans, right? So the more we can get rid of hard coding things and make things reusable, make them extendable, the better we can write software. And so does everyone understand kind of like the logic and what I did here by adding a second variable? And instead of it being hard coded, I'm giving the user a chance to figure it out. We could even go a step further and maybe get rid of this altogether, and you put in 1 string for the day, and then you actually put in the number, like you can actually type in a number here, right? Like I could actually just put in 200, right? And then we can divide it by a variable number, but we're giving our user a little bit more flexibility in solving their problem.
Yeah, it seems like a focus-based approach rather than like a general scope.
Right. And again, for things along these lines, like we're just doing little challenges here. Yeah, you get one size. That's if you're still in the military. But we're all in the real world, or most of us are out in the real world and we get choices unless you shop at Costco. So this is just like a little extra step past thinking about like the algorithm and how we would start to think like a developer and things that we could do to make things better. All right. And so Wednesday, we'll look at Fizzbuzz, probably detention. I think camel case. Come on. Okay, this doesn't want to load for me right now for some reason. But we'll probably look at this one. We'll start moving into some of the more, it looks like across the board. We're having some issues with Replit right now. Can everyone hear me okay? It's not just my whole internet going bad.
Yes.
No, we can hear you.
Okay, so it's not my fault. Cool. Yeah, so we'll try and fit in a couple more next week. I'll lead off with one. Let's see here. Oh, here we
I
go.
did have a question. Can you put prompts inside of like the functions?
I'm sorry, can you put what?
Like a prompt inside that function? So like where you're doing the caffeine like per can, like could we save like instead of doing the small, medium, large, can we do like caf per can equals prompt, you know, how much caffeine's in the can?
Not
Load into it.
not easily in JavaScript. JavaScript is a notoriously difficult language to get user feedback from, and not from the command line, and not if like in Replit, I wouldn't recommend it. But like if you were in VS Code and you were writing your own thing, typically what I would tell you to do is import a library that handles command line feedback from the user. Because there's no easy way to do it, but like in Python, right? So getting user input Python. Right, you just say name, so you define a variable and you say equals input. You ask your question in there, and then whatever they type in and hit enter at will then be assigned to that variable. Right, so like here, like in JavaScript, you've got to open up, well, you have to basically open up a interface and then process standard in and standard out. So you can see, I mean, it's quite a bit more to get input in JavaScript than it is. So yes, we could do it. We need to require readline, which is it should be a built-in library within Node. But like I said, this in JavaScript or that in Python, right? It's not that much fun trying to get it in JavaScript,
All right.
but absolutely can be done. All right, so it is 8:55 Central Time, and we've basically got about 5 minutes left here. Probably not enough time for me to start another challenge. Was there anything about the stuff that we talked about this evening that we would like to talk about? I can record anything you have right now. If not, I can turn it off, and I'm happy to answer any questions after I stop recording as well.
Can you explain the brackets inside of an object again? Like before you had the 0 and the 1, but the 1 had bracket greeting semicolon hello. I don't understand. Yeah, I don't understand why like brackets are in the
So what line are you looking at?
line 10 or is 1 greeting, yeah.
Okay, so that is, so instructor is an object, right? This whole thing is an object. That's why it's in curly braces. A object is a collection of key value pairs. The key, right, is going to be a string or a number, and that is how you identify the value. Values inside an object can be any valid value type, right? So I've got a string, I've got a Boolean, a string, a Boolean, another object, right? So I could do something like this where favorite sayings. So my favorite greeting is hello. My see here, motto is make it work, then make it pretty. And then salutation or right, something like that. And so what I can do here is this. I'm probably clean this up on it. Right. And so the instructor is an object, and then favorite sayings is an object. Right. And so that is why you can see these nested brackets, right? Like I could even do this, like things I can't say outside of the Marines, right? And I can do it again, right? So angry.
So is it like the same concept as like nested arrays? basically, almost.
Yes, it's nested objects,
Okay.
right? And clean these up. And so now if I wanted to do this, so I could say console.log, and I can say constructor. Let me just comment these out here real quick. Okay, no, that's good. All right. So again, there's a number, here's some strings, and here is a object, right? And so now when I just do instructor, I get the whole object. But if I do instructor and then say, because I've got no spaces in here, I could say favorite sayings and use dot notation, right? Now I get an object of my favorite sayings. And if I say greeting, right, I just get hello. But if I now say things I can't say outside of the Marines, right? So now I've got another object. And so I'm printing out the whole object, and I can keep digging deeper and say angry, right? And that's where I get there. And this is doing it in dot notation. And I could do the exact same thing.
Did you say earlier to avoid dot notation whenever possible?
So it is, so you can do more, you can do everything with bracket notation. With dot notation, you're limited in what you can do, right? So you can't do dot notation for date of birth. You cannot do dot notation for 0. However,
Okay.
if you come in here and you look at your object and you see that everything is a string with no spaces in it, then feel free to do dot notation. The big thing is that you want to try and avoid like switching up between the two, right? Like doing it like this, where you did dot notation, and then bracket notation. And it still works, right? I mean, you still get the answer. At that point, it's just a style thing.
Okay. Yeah, I get it now.
Cool. And I mean, we're moving the needle, but I mean, if you've got to ask me again on Wednesday, it's fine. Like I said, all of this is repetition. And I sat through a good chunk of code Platoon, being frustrated with digging in to objects and arrays and figuring out when I should use which one. So feel free to ask the same question multiple times. I mean, we'll get it there eventually. So it's now 9:01. I'm going to stop recording, but I'm also more than happy to hang out and